Welcome back to my channel Celebuzz. Please share and subscribe and press the bell icon for new updates. What if I told you that right now, as you're watching this video, one of the most powerful men in music history is sitting in a courtroom fighting for his life? Not fighting for his career, not fighting for his reputation, fighting to avoid spending the rest of his life behind bars. Sean Diddy Combs, the man who built a billion-dollar empire, who partied with presidents and presidents, who seemed untouchable for decades, is now facing charges that could put him away forever. And what's coming out in this trial? It's darker than anyone imagined. But here's the thing, the media isn't telling you everything. They're giving you bits and pieces, but they're missing the real story. Today, I'm going to break down exactly what's happening in that Manhattan courtroom, why this case is about so much more than just Diddy, and why the evidence being presented might change everything you thought you knew about the music industry. What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is where we dive deep into the stories that matter, the ones that don't get the full picture in mainstream media. We break down complex cases, explain what's really happening, and give you the facts without the fluff. Today we're talking about the Sean Combs trial, and trust me, this isn't just another celebrity scandal. This is a federal racketeering case that's exposing an entire system. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button because cases like this develop fast, and you don't want to miss any updates. Also, drop a comment down below. I read every single one, and your thoughts help shape future videos. Alright, let's get into it. First, let's be clear about what we're dealing with here. Sean Combs is facing charges of racketeering and sex trafficking for alleged crimes that took place over 2 decades, with some charges carrying a maximum sentence of life in prison. This isn't a civil lawsuit that gets settled out of court. This is the federal government saying they have evidence that Diddy ran a criminal organization. But here's what makes this case absolutely explosive. It's not just about what happened at parties. Federal prosecutors are trying to prove that Combs turned his hip-hop conglomerate into a racketeering enterprise. Think about that for a second. They're saying his entire business empire was essentially a front for criminal activity. The indictment alleges that from 2008 to 2024, Combs led what prosecutors call the Combs Enterprise, a criminal organization that used his businesses, including Bad Boy Entertainment, to facilitate crimes. We're talking about allegations of forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. This isn't just 1 or 2 incidents. This is the government claiming there was a systematic pattern of criminal behavior spanning nearly 2 decades. What's particularly chilling is how prosecutors describe the alleged operation. They claim Combs used his power and prestige to lure victims, often under the pretense of romantic relationships or career opportunities. Then, according to the charges, he would use force, threats, and coercion to get victims to participate in what the indictment calls freak-offs, elaborate sexual performances that were allegedly recorded without consent. But let's talk about something that's not getting enough attention: the money trail. This case isn't just about personal crimes. It's about how those crimes were allegedly funded and covered up through a complex web of legitimate businesses. Prosecutors claim that Combs used his various companies, from music labels to clothing lines to media ventures, to pay for and hide criminal activity. Think about this. When federal investigators started following the money, they found payments for hotel rooms, travel expenses, and what they're calling supplies for these alleged freak-offs. We're talking about a sophisticated operation that allegedly used corporate accounts and business expenses to fund criminal activity. That's not impulsive behavior, that's systematic planning. Now, what's actually being presented in court is where this gets really disturbing. When Homeland Security raided Combs' Miami mansion, they found gun components, platform heels, and a lot of baby oil. I know that might sound almost comical, but when you understand the context of the charges, it becomes much more sinister. Agents found 2 magazines loaded with bullets along with 2 lower receivers in the closet, with their serial numbers scratched out. Scratched out serial numbers? That's not an accident. That's someone trying to make weapons untraceable. But here's what's even more disturbing: the sheer volume of evidence seized. We're talking about over 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant, drugs including what prosecutors say were used to keep victims compliant, and multiple firearms spread across his properties in Miami and Los Angeles. This wasn't a small operation. And then there are the electronics. Prosecutors say they seized phones, computers, and hard drives containing what they describe as freak-off videos. These aren't just party photos. According to the charges, these are recordings of the alleged criminal activity itself. The prosecution claims some of these recordings show victims who were clearly not consenting, who appeared to be under the influence of substances, and who were being coerced. But perhaps most chilling is what investigators found in terms of planning documents, text messages, emails, and financial records that prosecutors say show this wasn't spontaneous behavior. It was planned, organized, and systematically covered up. What's becoming clear as this trial unfolds is that, if the allegations are true, Diddy didn't operate alone. The indictment mentions co-conspirators throughout, and while most haven't been named publicly, the implication is that this alleged criminal enterprise involved multiple people across different levels of his organization. Prosecutors claim that employees of Combs's businesses were involved in everything from booking hotel rooms for these alleged freak-offs to cleaning up afterward. We're talking about security staff, personal assistants, and even household staff, who allegedly helped facilitate and cover up criminal activity. Think about what that means. If true, it suggests that criminal behavior was so normalized within this organization that multiple people saw it as just part of their job. That's not a few bad decisions. That's a culture of criminality that allegedly permeated an entire business empire. But the physical evidence is just the beginning. The real bombshells are coming from the witnesses. Cassie Ventura, Diddy's former girlfriend and one of his accusers, has been testifying in the trial. Now remember, Cassie was the one who filed that explosive lawsuit back in 2023 that started this whole domino effect. Legal experts are calling her testimony key to jurors' understanding of the case because she's laying out the prosecution's entire narrative. But what's particularly powerful about Cassie's testimony is how detailed it is. She's not just talking about isolated incidents, she's describing patterns of behavior, specific locations, and even naming other people who were allegedly present. When a witness can provide that level of detail, especially about events that happened years ago, it suggests either an incredible memory or experiences that were so traumatic they're burned into someone's mind. Cassie has testified about alleged physical abuse, about being forced to participate in what prosecutors call freak-offs, and about being given drugs against her will. But perhaps most damaging to Diddy's case, she's testified about how these alleged crimes were covered up, payments to keep people quiet, threats against those who might speak out, and a systematic effort to control the narrative. But it's not just Cassie. Former Danity Kane member Don Richard and Carrie Morgan, a former friend of Cassie, have both testified, and their testimonies are corroborating Ventura's account. When multiple witnesses who don't know each other start telling the same story, that's when prosecutors get excited. Dawn Richards' testimony is particularly interesting because she was part of Diddy's professional world, not just his personal life. She's testified about witnessing alleged abuse and about the culture of fear that she says existed within his organization. According to her testimony, people were afraid to speak up, afraid to leave, and afraid of what might happen if they crossed him. And then there's this bombshell. Kid Cudi testified that Diddy, in a fit of rage and jealousy, broke into his home and coordinated the firebombing of his high-end sports car. Let that sink in. We're talking about alleged arson, breaking and entering, and intimidation tactics that sound more like organized crime than music industry drama. What makes Kid Cudi's testimony so explosive is that it allegedly happened because of Cudi's relationship with Cassie. According to the testimony, Diddy was so enraged about Cassie dating someone else that he allegedly resorted to criminal intimidation. If true, it shows a pattern of using criminal means to control and intimidate people in his orbit. One of the most important witnesses in this trial isn't someone from the entertainment industry at all. It's Dr. Dawn Hughes, a forensic psychologist who specializes in intimate partner violence. Her testimony is crucial because it helps the jury understand the psychological dynamics that prosecutors say were at play in this case. Dr. Hughes testified about how abusers often use a combination of love bombing, isolation, and escalating control to keep victims trapped in abusive relationships. She explained how financial dependence, career control, and social isolation can make it nearly impossible for victims to leave, even when they want to. What's particularly relevant to this case is her testimony about how victims of long-term abuse often develop trauma bonds with their abusers. This helps explain why some victims might have stayed in these alleged situations for years, why they might have appeared compliant in some of the evidence, and why they might have taken so long to come forward. This psychological testimony is crucial because it preempts one of the defense's likely arguments that these were consensual relationships between adults. Dr. Hughes's testimony helps the jury understand that consent can be compromised by power dynamics, financial control, and psychological manipulation. Here's what's really happening in this trial, and why it matters beyond just one man's fate. The prosecution isn't just trying to convict Diddy. They're trying to expose an entire system. A forensic psychologist testified about how domestic abuse victims often behave, which suggests they're building a case about patterns of control and manipulation that went far beyond individual incidents. Think about the timeline here. We're talking about alleged crimes spanning 2 decades. That's not a few bad decisions. That's a system. That's a way of operating that allegedly involved using power, money, and fear to control people. But what's really significant is how this case is being prosecuted. The Southern District of New York, the same office that's handled major organized crime cases, is treating this like a racketeering enterprise. That means they're not just looking at individual crimes. They're looking at an ongoing criminal organization. This approach allows prosecutors to connect seemingly separate incidents into one cohesive pattern. That alleged car bombing of Kid Cudie's vehicle? That's not just assault. Under RICO, it becomes part of a pattern of intimidation used to maintain the criminal enterprise. Those alleged payments to keep people quiet. That's not just hush money. It's part of a conspiracy to obstruct justice. Now let's talk about how Diddy's legal team is fighting back, because their strategy reveals a lot about the strength of the prosecution's case. The defense isn't denying that some of these events happened. Instead, they're arguing about consent and context. They're painting a picture of a successful businessman whose private life, while perhaps unconventional, was between consenting adults. They're arguing that what prosecutors call criminal coercion was actually just the dynamics of adult relationships, albeit relationships complicated by wealth and power imbalances. The defense has also focused heavily on challenging the credibility of witnesses, particularly those who they say have financial motives for testifying against Combs. Remember, many of these witnesses have also filed civil lawsuits, which means they could potentially receive monetary damages if Combs is found liable. But here's what's interesting about the defense strategy. They're not spending much time challenging the physical evidence. That suggests they know the guns, the drugs, and the other physical evidence are real, and that trying to explain them away would be difficult. What makes this case so significant isn't just what it might mean for Sean Combs. It's what it might mean for how we understand power and accountability in the entertainment industry. For decades, we've heard whispers about abuse and exploitation in music, film, and television. But most of those cases have been handled as civil matters or have been settled out of court. This case is different because federal prosecutors are using the full weight of criminal law to address what they say was systematic criminal behavior. If they're successful, it could set a precedent for how similar cases are handled in the future. It's also significant because of the time period involved. We're talking about alleged crimes that span from 2008 to 2024. That's nearly the entire modern era of social media and digital communication. That means there's potentially a massive digital trail of evidence, from text messages and emails to financial records and social media posts. What's almost as interesting as what's being said in court is what's not being said outside of it. Where are all the celebrities who used to party with Diddy? Where are the testimonials from industry friends? The silence is deafening, and in Hollywood, silence usually means one of two things. Either people are scared, or they're trying to distance themselves from something they know is bad. This silence is particularly notable when you consider how connected Diddy was in the entertainment world. We're talking about someone who collaborated with everyone from Jay-Z to Justin Bieber, who threw parties that were attended by A-list celebrities, and who was considered one of the most influential figures in hip-hop culture. But since these charges were filed, that support network has virtually disappeared. No major celebrities have come forward to defend him. No industry organizations have issued statements of support, and even his own artists have been notably quiet. This suggests that either these allegations align with what industry insiders already suspected, or that the evidence is so damning that even his closest associates don't want to be associated with him. Either way, it's a dramatic fall for someone who was once considered untouchable. What's particularly telling is how quickly major brands and business partners have distanced themselves. We've seen companies terminate partnerships, streaming services remove his content, and even academic institutions distance themselves from his previous donations. That kind of swift, universal rejection suggests that the allegations are being taken very seriously across multiple industries. This case is also significant from a legal perspective because it represents a new approach to prosecuting what might have previously been handled as civil matters or personal disputes. By using RICO charges, the same laws used to prosecute organized crime families, prosecutors are sending a message that systematic abuse of power in the entertainment industry will be treated as seriously as any other form of organized criminal activity. The success or failure of this case could influence how similar cases are prosecuted in the future. If prosecutors can successfully prove that an entertainment mogul used his business empire to facilitate criminal activity, it could open the door for similar prosecutions of other powerful figures in the industry. It's also worth noting that this case is happening in the post-Me Too era, when there's increased awareness of power dynamics and systematic abuse. The jury pool likely includes people who are more aware of how power can be abused and how victims can be silenced, which could influence how they interpret the evidence. The trial is ongoing with more witnesses being called, and each day seems to bring new revelations. Kid Cudi is expected to testify further this week, and given what we've already heard from him, that could be explosive. But the prosecution's witness list extends far beyond the celebrities we've heard from so far. Legal experts expect to hear from former employees, security personnel, hotel staff, and possibly even law enforcement officials who were involved in the investigation. Each of these witnesses potentially brings a different perspective on the alleged criminal enterprise. What's particularly important in the coming weeks will be the testimony from what prosecutors call cooperating witnesses, people who were allegedly part of the organization, but have agreed to testify against Combs in exchange for leniency in their own cases. These witnesses often provide the most detailed and damaging testimony because they have insider knowledge of how the alleged criminal enterprise operated. The defense will then have their opportunity to present their case, and their strategy will likely focus on discrediting witnesses and presenting an alternative narrative of what happened. They may call character witnesses, business associates, and possibly even Combs himself to testify. But here's the bigger question. If the prosecution can prove their case, what does that mean for everyone else who was part of this alleged system? Racketeering cases are designed to take down entire organizations, not just the person at the top. That means there could be additional indictments, additional arrests, and additional trials stemming from this case. We're also likely to see more civil lawsuits filed as this criminal case proceeds. Often, criminal cases give victims the confidence and the evidence they need to file civil suits seeking monetary damages. So even if this criminal case ends, the legal ramifications for Combs and potentially others could continue for years. One aspect of this case that isn't getting enough attention is the financial destruction it's causing to Combs's business empire. We're not just talking about legal fees, though those are certainly substantial. We're talking about the systematic dismantling of a business empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Major business partners have terminated their relationships, streaming services have removed his content, and even his own record label has distanced itself from him. The brand value that he spent decades building has essentially evaporated overnight. But perhaps more significantly, if he's convicted on these charges, prosecutors will likely seek to seize assets that they claim were part of the criminal enterprise. That could include real estate, businesses, and financial accounts. We're potentially talking about the complete financial destruction of someone who was once worth nearly $1 billion. This case matters because it's about power and accountability. For decades, we've seen stories about abuse and exploitation in entertainment get buried, ignored, or settled quietly. But federal racketeering charges can't be settled out of court. This is the justice system saying enough is enough. It's also about how we view celebrity culture. If these allegations are true, it means that some of the parties, the glamour, the lifestyle we've been sold as aspirational, was actually hiding something much darker. Look, I know this is heavy stuff. It's not easy to process that someone we've watched on TV, whose music we've listened to, whose success story we've been told to admire, might have been hiding something this dark all along. But that's exactly why we need to pay attention to cases like this. Justice doesn't happen in the shadows. It happens when people are paying attention, when the facts come to light, and when we hold powerful people accountable regardless of their fame or fortune. This trial is far from over, and I'll be following every development. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any updates, because I have a feeling this case is going to get even more intense before it's finished. What do you think? Are you surprised by what's coming out in this trial? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but keep it respectful. This involves real people and real victims. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to understand what's really happening, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue following this case as it unfolds. Until then, stay informed, stay critical, and remember, the truth always comes out eventually.